COBT listeners and viewers, it's Maynard and Mike, offshore Louisiana, with something we can't tell you how excited we are about this. I'll do a quick introduction and also a thank you. We're here with the team from Arena. They made the whole day possible. Mike Menarvik is the founder and CEO of Arena. You'll hear a little bit more about Arena, but it's a private company. They do a lot of things, including owning their own drilling rigs, their own pipes. It's an integrated operation out here, and it's fascinating. So Mike, let me just say thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming.
And thank you for the gear.
Absolutely, looks
wonderful.
good, looks good.
Well, and we're also super excited. I don't know, sometimes we just get lucky. Kate MacGregor is here with us today. She's the Deputy Secretary of the Interior, so literally number 2 person in the Interior Department. March 11th was a lease sale. We'll get her to talk about that. We'll get her to talk about so many of the things happening in Interior. But Kate, thanks so much for joining us. It's gonna be awesome.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank
All
you.
right, we got one more. We were greedy today. We've got Congressman Pete Stauber. Pete is from the 8th District in Minnesota. That would be the Iron Range for the rest of us. I think there's a lot of Viking fans up there. Also maybe some Green Bay. Green Bay, a little bit mixed, but Pete is the chair on the subcommittee for energy and mineral resources. So he'll tell us all about what's happening, not just in oil and gas, but across the spectrum in energy and particularly minerals. So we can't wait to talk to you, Pete.
Sure.
So that was, you can't appreciate this, but it's a little loud here on the rig. We wanted something authentic, so I'm shouting. I apologize. Kate, can I start a little bit with you?
Sure.
One thing in talking to your team and convincing you to join us, it's just amazing the stuff that is happening in government right now. Interior, energy, EPA, and I haven't even talked about state and war and everything else, but do you mind just sharing with us, internal to Interior, the pace, the focus? Doug Burgum's on the way to Japan. There's just so much going on, and Iran is, of course, on our minds, but that's the place I'd love to start. It's just under the hood at Interior.
Yeah, Interior is an awesome department because we manage all of our nation's public lands, or the largest proponent of our nation's public lands, and we are distinct in that we have the authority to regulate and provide for the development of our minerals. So at Interior this time around, of course, you probably know I was in the first Trump administration.
Yes.
So I think those first 4 years, we kind of figured out where we needed to go. President Trump was incredibly clear on making sure that we created American energy dominance. And Gulf of America is a perfect example. Traditionally, it's been between 18 and 15% of our nation's oil derives from these resources. So the president was super clear in many executive orders, go out, go do, and produce American energy responsibly. So the pace that you're talking about, and the reason we can keep that pace of moving regs out, making sure we're, reappointing the ship in the right direction towards responsible development is because we've done it before. And we've just been able to get an amazing team under Secretary Burgum and just go faster.
I was thinking, we were looking at these stats ahead of the discussion, but not quite 2 million barrels of oil a day coming out of the Gulf. I think it's 1.8, something like that.
Yeah.
2 BCF a day coming out of the Gulf. And then the other fascinating statistic that Mike had, his company has paid in its history almost $1.9 billion of royalties to the federal government. So people forget that the landholder is the federal government. The federal government makes money on this stuff.
Well, the important thing to remember too is of those royalty payments, they're not just going directly into the federal treasury. Now under President Trump's Great American Outdoors Act, those funds get redirected and reinvested into our public lands. So they're going to rebuild all of our national parks, Bureau of Land Management property, some of our refuge lands. They're going into increasing and maintaining the access for a lot of those sites. They go into the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which gets reinvested into state lands. And frankly, we should applaud Pete Stauber and the United States Congress, as well as the president, for passing the One Big Beautiful Bill, or the Working Families Tax Cut Act, because these lease sales that we're doing, like you mentioned that we were able to do these lease sales because of that explicit direction in the law.
You mentioned the lease sales. you know the law so much better than me, but the country has to have them.
Yes.
In the previous administration, they found a way to slow them down, whatever they did. Now we've had two.
Yes.
We just had one. Do you want to talk about that activity?
Sure. So the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, not to be a nerd, that directs us to make these acres available for lease for the American people to produce to meet national need. Of course, the American consumer relies on domestic gas supply and domestic oil supply for their gasoline. What we were able to do is, because we traditionally have these lease sales, we've encountered some issues related to some litigation. The United States Congress came in and directed us to have 30 lease sales within a specific amount of time. So we were able to do one big beautiful sale last year in December. This is our second One Big Beautiful sale, and then we're going to have another one coming up this August. Historically, I think Mike and others were used to a pace of at least 2 a year in the Gulf of America. So we're getting back to that and restoring that certainty so that companies can show up with their capital and reinvest in these shores. And companies like Arena, it's kind of incredible because they are reinvesting in the shelf, and the shelf plays are pretty interesting.
We were at something and we saw Doug Burgum. It was early on, and he was talking about the Mike, I'm thinking of you, because arena refers to the man in the arena, and there's a lot of White Fleet, and a lot of respect for Theodore Roosevelt around here. The original intent around public lands was they would be managed, preserved and protected, but managed for the benefit of the American people. And Doug was talking about this.
Yes.
Like, what's the return on investment to America of these lands? Do you mind that mentality is very different.
Sure. So the focus in most of our organic acts talks about conservation, not just protection. It's an important distinction. Our national parks are protected. Our refuges are protected for conservation purposes. And then when it comes to our mineral resources that are subsea, the conservation of resources is the development and smart production of those resources for the American people. And those dollars flow right back into all of the important other resources, such as our public lands and national parks, to make sure that the American people can enjoy them long into the future.
I was thinking, Pete, I rope you in. I think when people think about energy policy, they naturally gravitate to the Department of Energy. They don't really realize how important interior is. In fact, arguably, it affects a lot more of our production than DOE. Talk to us about your experience in energy policy making and how important interior is.
Well, they're at the tip of the spear because they help guide the decisions. They help guide with the rules. And when you have a president like President Trump and the people that he surrounded himself with, such as Secretary Burgum, Undersecretary MacGregor, that understand the value of energy independence, its energy security, is a big part of who we are as Americans. And I think that, Kate referenced the One Big Beautiful Bill and the mandated lease sales. We know under the Biden administration, not only were they the worst administration for mining, but they were the worst administration for energy, oil and gas exploration. And like today, we're here on this platform, and I just can't tell you how important. I wish every single American could see what we saw today, the workers, and what it's going to do. Mike talked earlier today. He said the homes in northern Minnesota are heated with the oil that comes right from here today. And we have to understand that. I just want to say this, that the state of Minnesota has zero oil and gas development, all right? But you will not find a person, a bigger proponent than me in the House of Representatives that supports this industry. I've been down here several times to understand when it's 30 and 40 below in the northern climates, when the sun's not shining and the wind's not, but we need that traditional, affordable, reliable energy. And those of us that live in the northern states actually understand that. And so what that One Big Beautiful Bill did with President Trump's direction allowed for certainty in the industry, allows for Arena and other companies to know that there's going to be lease sales in the Gulf of America where the barrels of oil are produced cleaner than anywhere in the world. We can do it here.
Can I ask you, Mike, you made this point about the gas that's coming out of the ground here is literally going in a pipe and it's going to Minnesota. So it's not like oil, it's not like electricity, it's just a different animal. But maybe just talk about that for a second, because our viewers appreciate it, but it's not something that is on the minds of most people.
Yeah, this basin that we're in right now, the shelf, the shallow waters of Gulf of America, has produced a tremendous amount of natural gas. It's a world-class natural gas basin. In fact, in the 90s, it was supplying the U.S. with 30% of its natural gas needs. And when a well is producing offshore, it goes through a pipeline, goes onshore, it gets compressed along the way. But unless it goes to an LNG plant, heads overseas, it's distributed across the country in various pipeline systems, but it never goes outside of that pipeline system. So effectively, a well in the Gulf of America is hooked up to a house and a stove in Minnesota or New York or Michigan, and there's no process where it ever gets offloaded from that pipeline.
Can I stick with you for 1 minute, Mike? Only because you're clearly an energy entrepreneur. You're out here risking your own money. You bought this rig. You guys put $50 million in it, fixed it up. The Gulf, I think your stat was the shelf at one point was producing 14 Bs a day. Now it's 2.
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of opportunity to keep investing, to keep doing stuff out here?
Yeah, and I think in today's commodity pricing, it's mostly going to be related to oil drilling. It's difficult to make natural gas work at $3.50, but there's a lot of oil to be found on the shelf, and we've been very proficient at discovering the remaining scraps off the shelf. But I think the real opportunity for big volumes will come in the deeper waters as we continue to explore and exploit that wonderful basin, which is mostly oil driven.
I wonder, Pete, if you wouldn't mind, mining is very much something that your district is familiar with, your state is familiar with. It's something we got to do more of. What would you tell all of us about the state of permitting more mining, doing more mining? What's your view?
Well, right now we're in a conflict with Iran. What it should tell all Americans and the leaders, the elected officials, that we need energy security. We need energy security for our country and our allies, and also mineral security. We cannot rely on the communist country of China any longer. They hold the keys to so much critical minerals that we need every day, whether it's medical technology, the instruments that we use in the hospitals, or the computers we use, the defense weapons we use, the aircraft, F-35s, for example. We need to mine more domestically, and this administration is just doing that in a responsible, environmentally friendly way. We can do it here in America, and when you have Republicans that politically are willing to do it, and you have the Trump administration willing to do it, we can do a lot of great things. Energy security and critical mineral security is what this administration is pushing forward, and we're seeing how critical it is today.
Can I ask you, because there was so much difference between the administrations in how they saw energy, but on minerals, it seemed like Trump and Biden actually both kind of understood we got to figure out is that fair?
Well, I think that for certain the Trump administration, because under the Biden administration, they didn't open a new mine till the very end of his first and only term. So we have to. It should not take an average of 29 years to open a mine in this country. Other countries are doing it quicker. We can do it without cutting corners. We have to have permitting reform for all industries, including mining, oil and gas, bridge building, road building, and we can do that. We have the will to do it, and we have to get it done for the American people.
Pete said it first, I should have taken bets. Permitting. How are you thinking about permitting? What can you tell us? What happens next?
Yeah, well, the way I think about permitting, and I was talking to some of Mike's folks about this development, and like, when you think about what you invest into a lease block like this, and we were talking about how this lease block was leased like 2 decades ago, acquired, and probably wouldn't have been reinvested in but for Mike, retrofitted, and now it's producing I think about every permit that you put in somebody's hand is an investment in the future and potential production for a 20 to 30 year window. So that's why I think the Congress and we are very interested in permitting reform, and it shouldn't be like years that you're waiting for your permit. I'll give you an example for onshore. When we came in the first Trump administration, the average time to process an APD was over 380 days just for one. And think about that, how many APDs you sink into the Permian Basin waiting for that development. And we were able, through just smart management, no law change, to get it down to 100 days or less. This time around, we have some interesting reforms. We just promulgated our new NEPA regs. We're looking at, once again, what is required. We have efficiencies provided to us in one big beautiful bill, and we're trying to collapse down those permitting timeframes while also making sure we're protecting the resources that we're required to protect and moving forward. I think that there's a lot of interesting promise going on some of the work that the committee has done and what I'm hearing on the Senate side, and we'll see what they put forward in the Senate.
Do I have this right? Also, you've lowered the royalty rate in Gulf of America. Do you mind talking about that? Sure. I've been around it for so long. Occasionally, the M word comes out.
Oh well, yes. Gulf of America. So essentially, royalties for the longest time were 12.5% offshore. They just started ratcheting up. When we came into the first Trump administration, we were looking at them. And unfortunately, that has been a measure based on some of our internal studies where we're pricing out the Gulf for other basins in the world. All the capital that these companies are looking at, they're looking at every basin, regardless of the geopolitical issues in those areas. So we need to make sure our basins are staying competitive, especially on federal land. One big beautiful bill basically directed us to go back to 12.5%. We used that, we went back down, and we're seeing it, and people are showing up to our lease sales.
I forget who told us this, but we were in a conversation the other day, and it was something like, in 50 years in the UK North Sea, they've changed the tax rate 25 times.
Wow.
It's something, and it of course totally discourages investment.
Right, yeah.
Mike, let me turn it to you. I'm hogging the mic here.
No worries. I just really want to thank you, Pete, and thank you, Kate, for actually coming here. And I was telling Kate, we were at lunch, and I was like, oh, where are you from? What do you do? She's like, oh, I'm the Undersecretary of the Interior. I was like, man, you sound like you're a hedge fund manager with that amount of questions you're asking here. Really good questions, really engaged, and that gives us a lot of hope that your department is engaged. The last administration didn't seem like they were there, so thank you for that. And Mike, thank you for hosting us as well.
Absolutely.
Now, obviously, podcast wouldn't be a podcast unless we asked the AI question, right? You talked a lot about 2D, 3D. Now we have AI just like going to a whole nother level. How do you think that is going to change your business from the standpoint of just making things a lot easier to look at? Just maybe, is it going to change the golf? Because the golf has been kind of going down for the last 10, 20 years. Is there going to be a revival in the golf because of technology?
Yeah, I think we're using AI in a lot of different ways. It's just starting every month, it's more and more. I'm shocked at how much we're able to incorporate it. We're going to see a big impact of efficiency within our company. We haven't quite started using it for exploration, interpretation of the seismic, but I think that's coming in the future, and we're excited to see the way it's developing. We're trying to be aggressive as we can and learning every week. It changes so much. We've really been using Claude Cowork a lot lately. That's been a big game changer for us.
Yeah, maybe the other thing, obviously in the news right now is what's going on with the Iranian war. I mean, you're sitting there as running a business. How do you run the business and basically say, I'm just not going to look at this news. I mean, I got to run my business. The volatility has been huge. Are you just looking through this stuff? Does it present opportunities? Is there some downfall here? You talked about what the ideal oil price would be too. Is maybe some talk about how you're viewing the current situation, or are you just looking through it?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I mean, it's hard not to be caught up in the day-to-day evolution of those events, and we've seen it on the opposite side where things collapsed in 2020. Actually, we had negative pricing for a couple days in April of 2020. So commodity businesses are tough in that regard. We have to use hedging to look out. So, even right now, we've got 80% of the second quarter hedged. We got 50% of third quarter. So what's happening in Iran doesn't really impact us too much. But I would like to see oil stable. Any commodity producer would like to see oil or their commodity stable, so you can really make long-term business decisions. For me, 70, 75 would be a very favorable price for us. It'd be good for the consumer and be able to plan long-term investments along that
And
price.
I think that's a good message to the administration too. It's like these guys are not looking for $90, $100. They just want 70, 75 with stability because they can make an investment. And I think that's important for you to hear from a CEO.
I was thinking, we are all these events that have been happening lately. We had Russia, Ukraine. We have competitive tension with China. We had the operation in Venezuela, and now we have the Mideast. And all of this is a huge commercial for why we have to have resilient supply lines. It's incredible. We're all used to the fighting that's happening on the TV screens. Behind closed doors, would you say in Washington, D.C., the knowledge that we have got to address these things and be, like, is it better than we probably perceive on the outside looking in?
I think outside events, geopolitical events, has forced us to have that conversation. COVID, we realize we can't rely on foreign adversarial nations, and then the conflicts around the world. We want a steady supply of energy, an affordable energy, reliable. And I think we're all coming to that conclusion. When we talk about permitting reform, for example, there was one time when my colleagues on the other side of the aisle just wanted permitting reform for wind and solar. We said, no, we need it for all industries for permitting reform. And they're starting to understand that we have to be competitive as a country. When the United States leads, the world is much safer, and we're seeing that.
Can I ask you, because your district abuts Canada, and for the longest time, North America was seen as an integrated energy system, and there's so much that is still interconnected. Any thoughts on when we might have peace with Canada and draw on the resources on both sides of the border?
Canada and Mexico, they're great friends of ours. Just like family, we as a family.
Occasionally, there's a squabble.
Yeah, there's could be arguments. I've got 5 brothers. I can attest to that, and I got 6 kids, so I can attest to that too. But I will tell you that Canada and Mexico, great partners of ours, great trading partners. We just want to make sure that everything is level and fair. And under this administration, we've seen some things that weren't. President Trump will correct the action. He wants to make sure that the American people are not taken care of, or taken advantage of, rather. He will not allow the United States to be taken advantage of. And he has seen in so many areas, and he wants to correct them in a fast time frame. And some people can't adjust to that. But I can assure you that we have good friends and allies across the world, and Canada and Mexico are good allies of ours.
I was wondering, Kate.
We won the hockey game.
Yeah, we went.
Well, okay. You mentioned permitting first, Kate. Hockey first.
There you go.
Pete, you are a Division I national championship hockey player.
Yes,
It's pretty incredible.
I have. I've been blessed in my life. Hockey has brought great things to me and my family. So, national championship in '88, Division I, and we won it in Lake Placid where the '80 Olympic team played. So it was pretty special. And we were the first team to visit a sitting president of the United States, and in April of 1988, it was Ronald Reagan.
I bet that was fun. Did you give him a Gipper jersey?
No, we got the picture with them, so I have that.
That's worth its weight in gold. I was wondering, Kate, I was thinking about last week, Secretary Burgum was in Venezuela. This week, I believe Burgum, Wright, and Zeldin are all going to Japan. Like, there's these international relations and connectivity and energy relationships. Anything you would tell us about any of those dialogues?
I would just say the USA is the hottest it's ever been.
Okay.
I think it shows. I mean, Secretary Burgum came back and he said he was incredibly well received in Venezuela, and it was an awesome trip. We normalized relations after that and announced that. I mean, I think it's incredible what we're able to do, and the geopolitical influence that we're now showing on the world stage. Energy and minerals are clearly really important to a lot of those ongoing discussions, and I think we'll see how that all ripens.
I think one thing that is very interesting about this administration, but particularly from an energy standpoint with Chris Wright and Doug Burgum, you have business executives leading significant departments. Like, would you mind, Kate, just talk about that that type of leadership and what the difference you think it makes?
Sure. I think Secretary Burgum is incredibly entrepreneurial and inherently, given his startup and what he's been able to create. And I think he looks at that and he looks at the playing field of U.S. businesses and is how can we create more of that entrepreneurial spirit and make sure our regulatory systems at Interior and other departments are not holding that back, and making sure too that capital can flow into the United States and result in amazing projects like this, like others that develop energy for our country. And on top of that, as we create more of those energy and resources, become less dependent on foreign countries and thus be a little bit more insulated from what you're talking about when it comes to these geopolitical flare-ups.
It just seems like it's so healthy for a regulator to understand what the business person is trying to, work through.
Yeah, and I think timeframes have been big. Lawsuit litigation, that's something that's not just up to us to solve. I know the Congress is looking at that, but how we can move faster so that they can have more certainty. Again, just pointing right back to the lease sale this morning, we had a bunch of bidders. We netted about $50 million. Pete, Congressman Stauber.
I heard you read the winning bid.
He had the winning bid.
21 million.
Yeah.
9,000, like 324.
Yeah, and if you look back at some of those lease sales offshore, even like 10 to 20 years ago, some of those sales were netting like billions of dollars. So just making sure that we have that level of certainty, companies can show up, and if there's that certainty, then when you're at the boardroom table trying to sanction a project, at least you know, well, yeah, we're going to have the lease sale, we can get the rights, we can unitize, and we may be able to develop.
Mike, I was thinking, we made a trip out to the Powder River Basin and we saw the Peabody Energy guys, and they're these awesome people that are working hard, working on holidays, making energy happen. And the same people are right here on this rig. I was wondering, all the companies we're around in almost any context, industrial, mining, power, oil and gas, everybody's worried about people. Where do I find the people? Where do I find the people with the skills? Who's going to take the job, driving the mining truck? Like, what would either of you say about our people and how we fill those jobs?
I will just say that as Mike knows, and he has shown it here, you have to build a culture in your organization where people want to come and work because it's so competitive. Employees are not just a number. They're human beings. They make a living for their families. And I can tell you, Mike does that with Arena Energy. He has built the culture here because I've talked to them. They've worked here for years and years because of the culture. And that goes for any industry. When you take care of your employees, you treat them like a mom or dad or a brother or sister, a part of the family, they will be very loyal and work hard for you, and they'll make a lot of money.
Mike, where do you find your people and how do you keep them?
Yeah, I think Pete's right on. Create a culture that's attractive to the best people. We want people to have a sense of ownership. We provide ownership opportunities for them, and we want people to act like an owner, and we treat them with respect. Of course, we pay them well, and we describe our strategy, where we're going longer term, shorter term, so then inevitable black swans happen, the challenges happen. People understand the long-term view and can fight through those and prosper during the good times. So we've been fortunate enough to collect some of the best oil and gas finders and producers and operators that have ever existed on the shelf, and that's really key to our success.
I was now let's see, we had permitting, hockey was another word. Okay, now I got to do affordability. One thing about affordability, Kate, that's very interesting is, and I guess it's a little bit at DOE, but it's a broader administration push. The government capital is now more focused, in my words, now more focused on reliability and security and less on decarbonization. That was a big shift. And so do you mind talking about just what you notice with government efforts right now to fund more infrastructure, to get rid of bottlenecks, to eliminate problem areas where people can't get cheap energy?
Yeah, I mean, Secretary Burgum always talks about baseload power, and that's a real focus for us. And I think what you've seen is like a pendulum swung in one direction very far. And this administration is trying to rectify that. And at the end of the day, we know the U.S. consumer needs fossil energy. They need baseload power, and they need their power to be 24/7. So the Secretary and I think the entire cabinet and the president have been very focused on restoring that balance and getting back to, yes, we need to invest in fossil energy, offshore is included. We can't have pauses that are, just ending offshore development willy-nilly, and we need to, incentivize and reinvest in those operations.
I was thinking, we had a team on last week from Lazard's geopolitical team, and they were talking about foreign enterprises around the world. For a while, America has been toggling between policies, and they talk about that. As a foreign investor, you're like, I'd like you guys to be stable. How are you thinking about? Bringing that stability.
I think about people look at policies and policymakers and how policy changes, but then when you look at the physics of an operation, like the grid or where people are getting their power, or the big snowstorm last week and what was going on up and down the East Coast, we were using natural gas generation, nuclear to keep the power on. So I think policies sometimes don't reflect the reality of physics, and that's what I think this administration is very focused on restoring. And the bottom line is American families and businesses need U.S. oil and gas, and we're making sure that that is back online and that there's certainty, at least on the federal side, for those lease sales. The same can be said for coal, and the same can be said for our critical minerals. It's needed. We should be producing it here. We have it here.
So you mentioned coal. Perhaps no other industry in the last year and a half has experienced a comeback quite like coal, because the administration is like, we got to stop closing plants. We need these. Anything you'd say about coal in particular?
I mean, I'd say if you look at the number of regulations across the federal government that you've seen focused on coal, especially over the past 4 years and then years before, it's incredible. And when we talk about capital, and to your earlier question about Secretary Burgum being a businessman, you can see that these regulations and the long-term certainty of the regulatory environment being against specific energy sources has had a capital constraining end goal, and we see that playing out in a lot of the reinvestment when it comes to even just who people are picking for generating facilities. So when it comes to U.S. coal and the coal on federal property, we're making sure that we're restoring all the NEPA, all the resource management plans that the BLM does to put coal back on the table as a choice. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
I was thinking, you nudged Mike and said, Mike, you should be looking at Alaska. You're a talented guy. Alaska is that place when you're thinking about, I think we had Governor Dunleavy on, and he said, I think I've been sanctioned more than like a lot of rogue regimes, Like, tell us about Alaska and some of the changes there. Because
Sure.
so much of that's federal land.
A lot of it, 60% of Alaska is federally owned, federally managed. But we have really interesting other laws in Alaska, like ANILCA and ANCSA, where you work with the native corporations and you're restoring Alaska's claim to specific lands in the state. And that's what we're working on. We've worked on some PLOs to pull them back so that the state of Alaska can make selections for specific land transfers back to the state. When you look up at the slope, we have MPRA and we have the coastal plain that had been stated in law. These are meant for development, but previous administrations have pretty much written them off and tied them up into planning and regulatory complete red tape. So we've slashed all that in the first year, and we're doing our first NPR lease sale in the next couple of weeks.
And I would say to what Kate was referring to, as Governor Dunleavy from Alaska says, the former administration, the Biden administration, put more sanctions on the state of Alaska than they did Iran. It's such a difference under the Trump administration, allowing certainty once the developers or the industry meets the requirements to build or to manufacture or to drill, they ought to be able to do it. The fact of the matter is judicial review has to come into play somewhere, because you can have a record of decision in year 2, and in year 9, they're suing on the record of decision in year 2. And you shouldn't have these industries that want to produce should not have to, in their time frame, in their game plan, consider 7 to 11 years of litigation, or they can't move forward.
So does that mean that permitting reform will come with some sort of litigation reform?
I'm in favor of that. That's the conversation we're having, and I think that the judiciary has been weaponized against certain industries, and we want to remove that.
Mike?
Well, I just wanted to say, like, you guys talk, your industry is always about, the market's going to correct. There are market corrections. When it comes to policy, sometimes there's policy corrections. And what we've seen, same with the judiciary. So when you look at the 7 counties case out of the Supreme Court that basically took NEPA and said, no, NEPA is not meant to unilaterally stop projects. It's meant to disclose the environmental impacts. Put that back in its box. And so much of that has been used and weaponized against any infrastructure, every infrastructure project in this country, not just fossil energy. Same with what Congress is doing on the Congressional Review Act. We've seen BLM resource management plans that unilaterally cut out coal, right? Like in the state of Montana. So the Congress stepped up and they passed a CRA saying you can never propose something like that again. So the danger in going too far in one pendulum direction is that sometimes people step up in a policy perspective or in the judiciary and they correct it. And that's what the other benefit of this administration is. We came in on the heels of some pretty interesting landmark Supreme Court decisions in the environmental law space, and a Congress that was willing to act and pass incredibly critical legislation that says, go do this. And we have a president that's like, yes, go do this for America, and we're doing it.
Mike?
Yeah, Kate, you were in Trump's first presidency in the Interior Department. And I think, we're hearing it back then and we're hearing today, price at the pump is a big issue, right? And we basically coined this phrase that price at the plug is the new big issue now.
Price what?
Price at the plug is the big issue now. And I really want to kind of, think about that from the standpoint of, you were in the first administration, the Interior, and now you're in the second. Back then, oil was doing its own thing, electricity was doing its own thing. They never really got into each other's worlds. But they're now converging into each other's worlds. How do you at the Department of Interior think about the new environment and how, this whole convergence, how to deal with that culturally, how you get the mindset in the organization to be thinking about the whole puzzle as opposed to just energy or, fossil fuels, just the whole thing?
Like,
is there a different mindset?
You've moved some buckets around in terms of how you manage the place, I believe, but you tell us.
Move some buckets around.
Meaning like who's in charge of what and how you categorize, like geothermal is with oil and gas. There's been some interesting ways in which you've been.
Well, the way we organize and the way we're looking at a lot of our groups is how are we going to create more, everything we're doing, especially on down to our people, our valuable asset, the folks who are processing permits and working through a lot of these tough issues to get to either yes or hey, you need to do more work. We're looking at ways to create efficiency everywhere. It doesn't matter where geothermal is. And if you look at the engineers we have, the talent we have, one person working on NEPA and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management might be able to help the BLM work through a couple issues because they have that incredible expertise. But when you say writ large, all of the energy, I think what you'll see from our department is we're focusing on an end result where things get processed faster and that you have a more durable product, and then we'll be with you in court when it gets challenged, if it gets challenged. And these days, we know it's going to be challenged. And things like ESA reform, which we put out, our proposed ESA regs, that helps the entire nation on any infrastructure.
And there also seems like a sense of urgency to get to stuff done quickly, right? As opposed to maybe the first presidency where you're going, we've got another 4 years after that. You realize it may be 2 or 3 and we got to do something.
Technically, I think I realized in the first administration, time flies. Time flies when you're having fun. I think just getting through what I wanted to be done through a lot of our regs in Q1, Q2 of this year so that we can move on to the next set of what's the next layer that we can get into. How deep can we get into this organization to change and make efficiencies last? And that's what we're focusing
How
on.
many people at Interior?
So there's about 55 to 60,000 people at Interior.
Wow.
Every day is a fun day. We have several different assistant secretaries. We have great bureau directors running point. I mean, a lot of our talent comes up to us in the summer too in the form of seasonals. So like if you think about the National Park Service, we're hiring thousands of people to help support our parks. I'm going to put a little plug in for Freedom 250 because this is the 250th year that we're celebrating the birth of our amazing country, and we have a slew of different events across the country. The Park Service is just one of them. We're hosting a lot of things on the National Mall to celebrate, but all of those folks coming in every day are doing their best to make sure these lands are available, that these resources are available, and that we're getting to decisions faster.
I'm kind of dumbfounded because as if all of this wasn't enough to manage. Oh yeah, we've got the 250th anniversary of America. You've got to plan
the most fireworks
National
you've
Park.
ever seen on July 4th.
Oh, this is big.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Well, we have to wrap up. It's terrible. It's hard to do. Pete, thank you so much.
Yeah,
because you know one thing you did that is so important. We noticed some tech companies do this too. It's a funny analogy, but you said Minnesota does not. You know, we don't produce oil and gas. We don't produce. You know, you're neutral, and when people are neutral, speak out for what they think is the right thing, it's very impactful. So I just think what you're doing is very important.
As long as I'm privileged to serve Minnesota's 8th district, you can count on me supporting the industry that fuels America and strategically helps our national security.
Kate, we can't thank you enough. As Mike said, it's an honor, and congrats on the lease sale.
Thanks
Tremendous.
for having me. Thanks for having
Mike,
me.
I go back to where I started. What an incredible host. We've known you forever. You cared so much about energy policy, the country, all forms, doing what's right. God bless you, sir.
Thank you. Just drill, baby, drill.
Thanks so much, everybody.